3 minutes.
Okay. Would be limited to 3 minutes. Do you want me to repeat that?
I think we're fine.
Okay.
So call for the question. All those in favor of the motion, say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Oh.
Okay. 10 ayes. The motion passes.
Passes. Okay. All right.
Phew.
Phew.
Okay.
Thank you, Technical and Outreach Committee. I know everybody, how's the break? I'm sorry.
Chairman, we do have one thing in terms of agendas for next meeting. Because of our limited time, we have to determine, in order to post for the input hearings, because we won't be meeting again, we need to determine the time for at least technically until April 28th, all those meetings, but probably we should just finish out April because we will not have another meeting time to determine the input hearing times, so we need to have those agendized for public posting.
Can we leave that to the staff to do?
We would need you to approve them. How about if, while you take the break, we figure the times, and then you can approve them after a break?
Please, and then can we come back also with the motion for the delegated authority so that we can do some of these things in between of this nature going forward?
And then just one other, do we need to vote on this at least through June? And we could do that with the time. I'm assuming it would be a combined motion, at least April through June? Because that was the committee looking for that.
We
I
are
thought it was an
looking
action
for an action
Vote
item.
on that.
this,
Okay,
yes.
so we'll do that with the times? So now that, because it didn't include that, we'll do it all together? All right. 5 minutes. I know. We're back live. It's 3 o'clock. We have 2 more items before we move on to the next of our advisory committee reports. The 2 items that we have in front of us are the actual adoption of the calendar with times, and the second item, which has been brought to my attention that I didn't realize was still outstanding from the Outreach and Technical Committee, is the logistics of how we're all going to get to all these places, and a discussion on how to do that in the most convenient and least expensive way. Let me just say on that discussion, I don't want to sit here for 2 hours and discuss buses and routes and what airline has the best flights. What I would suggest is that we have some parameters and we really ask staff to explore some ways to make this work instead of us trying to be 14 travel agents. So, with that said, we have an item. There's no motion, but because we need to discuss the times.
Yeah. So, did staff manage to contact?
No, they're trying right now.
Okay. So, again, the recommended time for the week days are in the evenings, and the suggested hours, we could suggest 6 to 9 o'clock, and more if necessary. I'll put that on the table. On weekdays, maybe we'll take it in that order.
Could I suggest there's also maybe some regional differences? The Reading, Yuba City, and then maybe even into the 13th through 16th. I don't think traffic will be as much of an issue here, so the times may be different. It could be earlier than the ones in LA. I would really like to hear the LA specific ones, because I think if we set a general time for the Central Valley and Northern Valley, that we could probably be okay with that.
My only comment about that is, again, the consistency issue. Why don't we just, people have more time to get there, they have more time to get there. Why don't we just say 6 o'clock everywhere, and if that gives some people time to eat more than others, so be it. I mean, just to have a set time so that there's no confusion. Okay. And that would be my comment on that. Others? Yes.
When you said set time, is that set time across all the regions?
Yes.
My only thought around that is regarding some of the meetings. If we start at 6 and we have a particularly large meeting, that it does not give us much flexibility. It means we'll be going very late into the night, potentially midnight. I mean, according to some of the rough calculations I was doing, so maybe there'd be opportunity of starting it a bit earlier.
My own thought about that, is that 5:30 is not a big difference than 6, and if we're going to be late, we're going to be late. So I don't think it's worth changing 6 to 5:30 just to get in a half an hour, but that's just my own. Filkins-Weber?
And we won't know how many people are attending to accommodate that prior to a hearing.
So I would say that I would recommend starting at 6, ideally ending at 9.
If possible, yeah.
Possible.
Commissioner Yao.
Question. Are we committed to stay until 9 o'clock just in event some people show up to the meeting late?
Yes. If we have to go beyond 9, we have to.
I think it's like any other meeting. We notice it, it's publicly noticed, and we have to be there until the end of the meeting, that's been noticed. Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
I agree. That was my same point at the civic engagement, and Mr. Wright has mentioned that actually in writing and today, and I do feel that if we're going to agendize it for 6 to 9, we will be committed to be there till 9.
Commissioner Columbus-Malloy.
Just in the LA area, I do have some concern around starting at 6. I think that in addition to the public, it also puts us as commissioners in the position of traveling to get there during the peak of rush hour, when there may be people who would be able to come and give their testimony earlier in the evening.
Can I have a motion on the 6 to 9 for the weeknights?
Sorry, so moved.
We've got a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Yes, Commissioner Wright.
I was just curious, is this something that we can't just give direction to staff to do like guidelines? This is what we prefer. And the only reason I ask the question is why it has to be a hard, is, again, not knowing that we don't have facilities for almost any of these yet, and kind of similar to what Commissioner Gomez-Malloy is saying, there might be intricacies that we all agree for site-specific locations. Can't we just say to staff that this is what we'd like to see, but not formalize it in the form of a motion that is unflexible?
Whose motion was that?
Mine.
Is there any way you want to change it?
No, I understand that we have notice requirements regardless of the fact that this is here, there, and everywhere. So that's why I'm saying 6 to 9. I mean, obviously we have options if, we really have to exercise them at some point, but we need to start somewhere, I think, for the sake of the public.
Commissioner DiGiulio?
Could I make a suggestion for a friendly amendment? Simply that we would to keep the motion, but that if there's issues related to the venue, that we allow staff to make those minor changes. Is that possible to address that concern?
Well, if I may politely decline your amendment, but only because I think we have that discretion, or we power, or whatever already, so don't we? I mean, would I be correct in saying that?
You would be correct that this is where we're going to get into the delegation issue, but if we said 6 or 9, but, the place we we're going to be at is flooded, or, I'm serious, stuff's going to happen. We have to have some way of dealing with that staff consults with X people that we have delegated authority to deviate from the agreed upon 6 to 9 schedule. And we've got staff for a reason, and if they find out that this one location closes, the security guards go home at 8, and so in order to have 3 hours, we have to meet at 5, then they can come back to the lead people and say, we have a policy in place, but we suggest that we do this for this place, and we'll do it with proper notice, which is why we need to move on, because they have to start making these calls about these places so that if there are difficulties with some of these locations, they can start identifying them and start, and then we may have to alter things. So there's a second, more discussion on the motion? Okay, I'll call the question. Oh, public comment, sorry.
Jim Wright again. Commissioners, might I suggest that you tell staff that you want a 3-hour meeting in the evening at the appropriate time? Or if it's a day meeting, you want a 5-hour meeting during the day at what might be a site-appropriate time. And the other consideration is some of the times you have business meetings on the same day, and suggest that you might agendize those before the public input meeting, rather than after. Thank you.
Any other public comment? More discussion? Commissioner DeGiulio.
Mr. Wright made a good point. Did we not add a business meeting at the end of April? So would that change the time for that day, because that is part of what needs to be agendized?
My note shows, yes, April 28th at the Los Angeles downtown venue. I have a note as a business meeting, but I don't think this motion goes to that necessarily. I think it's just for the public input, but certainly I would leave it to staff's discretion for appropriate time of our business session in conjunction with the chair. Chair's going to know what the agenda is going to be and how much time we need to spend for a business meeting on those days that we've designated separately from input. So I think public input is what the focus of the motion is for 6 to 9.
Thank you. More discussion? Okay. Call for the question. All in favor? Signify aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Oh, sorry. One no from Commissioner Anchetta. All right.
Second recommendation, the weekend hours be from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m.
Do you want to give us your thinking so that we don't repeat that? Just anything we need to know?
The idea is on the weekends, you have a greater opportunities for family to attend. Mornings usually are, well, they're busy doing family things. But I would imagine the afternoon hours allows the families or people to come to these events. That's it.
Yes, Commissioner Parvenu.
You're suggesting 1 o'clock as opposed to 2 o'clock, giving Saturdays a longer window of time than weeknights, which are 3 hours. So you're recommending that we have 4 hours on Saturdays and Sundays?
Yes. I'm open for a discussion.
Yeah. Commissioner DeGiulio and then Commissioner Galambos-Malloy.
Just to speak on that, is there, because we just raised this issue before, is that if we notice it, we have to be there for that entire time? Is there a benefit to having a 3-hour window, knowing we could go longer, versus locking ourselves into having to be there for 4 hours? Do we anticipate having significantly more public comments on the weekend that would warrant the need to be there for 4 hours at the minimum?
Yeah, I think we're going to have more people showing up during the weekends. That's my thought.
I have Commissioner Galambos-Malloy, Commissioner Anchetta.
My only consideration was for the Sunday specifically, that 1 o'clock is a pretty tight window for those who are going to church. Is a, normally it can go, you might get done with church at 12. Some churches you might get done at 1, or, just building in a little cushion there. So on a Sunday, starting at 2 might make more sense.
2 is fine.
2 is fine?
2 to 5.
5?
And again, it might go over 5, but that would be the ideal termination.
Commissioner Anchetta.
Yeah, and actually the reason, I should have spoken at the previous motion. The reason I voted on the previous motion is, my feeling is we should give staff discretion to set the times, but there should be equal hours. So I prefer 4 hours for each, both weeknight and weekend, but there's not a differentiation because, again, we're kidding different regions, and we give 4 hours to one region versus 3 hours to another. But that was my feeling, and it's also why I voted no on the last motion.
So the recommendation now is weekends 2 to 5. Do I have a motion on that?
So move.
What?
Would you like to amend your motion, or did you make a motion?
It was just a recommendation. I didn't make a motion.
Yeah, that's
So
why.
if you-
And he changed his recommendation from 1 to 2, and it's now 2 to 5. There was discussion. Is there a motion that we meet on weekends from 2 to 5?
I would like to make that motion that we have the weekend hours from 2 to 5 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Public comment.
Jim Wright again. Ditto my previous comments. I think a period of time rather than an absolute hour is a better idea.
Thank you.
I see Daniel stepped in. Were you able to communicate with Karin?
Yes, I was, and I have a few pieces of information. The first thing is that Anna is gone to one meeting, and she has the information. Karin is leaving on another meeting. So the earliest that I'm going to be able to coordinate this calendar with her is going to be Monday. So we're going to have to work through the lead and then send you out that information. She, on the issue of the two regional meetings, she said the closer those meetings are together, the better off it will be, because then she can get the information and then present it to you more quickly and incorporate it into the map. On the conversation of how many days she needed to meet with you, she indicated that she only needs a couple of days, that she's going to take the information you've given her, create the maps, and then would meet with you, and you would make the corrections in that 2-day period. So we have blocked 6 days here. So perhaps we can have a business meeting there, or whatever we need to do. Or we could, if we're at the Memorial Weekend, I guess we could maybe take some of these other meetings and move them out. I mean, I don't know. But at any rate, we don't need that much time. It might just be, heaven forbid, it might be a break for you guys and you could just have a little time off. But that's the information she communicated to me. Also said that it doesn't matter where she meets you, whether she meets you in Sacramento to go over the information or the Bay Area, but because she lives in the Bay Area, she always thinks the Bay Area is a better place for her to give you that information. So that's, and on the issue of the, now that I think about it, there are two other issues. The piece for the toolkit, that was actually given to us on communities of interest and so forth when Bonnie Glacier was here in our last session, but they are refining it, and she will give it to the Commission, and she would like very much to have it included into our toolkit. And last but not least, she wanted me to ask the Commission to give her some guidance on what they would like her to do as she goes around and still gives some talks as the director of the statewide database on the database. She understands that she cannot be talking about any of the redistricting for the Commission, but she had prior engagements lined up to give those talks, one of which she's giving this weekend, and she just wants to clear that calendar with you and make sure that she's doing what you wish her to do.
Okay, well, I think let's finish. We have a motion on the floor. I don't believe that anything that we've just heard affects this particular motion about the weekend times. So we've had public comment and no any further discussion. Call the question. All in favor, say aye and raise your right hand. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. All right. Mr. Chair, is that Mr. Lead Advisory Committee person?
That is Part A. Part B is not a calendar itself.
Okay. So now some of the information that, if you bear with me, I'd like to do something before we approve the calendar, because I think it might make the approval of the calendar a little bit easier. Can we hear from our Chief Counsel the recommendation on designating leads to work with the chair and staff in between meetings on certain items, given that we're going to be having to make some compressed decisions and changes potentially in venues and just the kind of thing we've been talking about. And this is, maybe you can just report this item out of the Legal Advisory Committee that was kicked over to us and we considered it.
Well, we had a thorough discussion in the legal committee about how this might work and the benefits that would flow from it. And the concept that emerged from our committee was, I think, what we referred to as more of a lead person for the committee than a chair of the committee. And the essence of it is that that would be a regular person designated not to make significant substantive decisions either on behalf of the committee, but rather to focus on what I call the mundane or the ordinary business that facilitates the Commission's overall mission and can hold things up in the absence of a place to go. Maybe a good example is what we were just talking about, a particular where we would like to have meetings from 2 to 5, and for whatever reason there's a good venue, but you can only have it from 3 to 7. As a staff, I think we'd feel constrained to make that change where the Commission has spoken on a preferred time without having some approved way to get a blessing for that change. So we thought that having a couple of people designated from the different committees was a good way to facilitate the ordinary as opposed to the extraordinary between meetings.
So, yes, questions? Commissioner Yao.
Mr. Miller, could you try to distinguish the type of decisions that currently we ask staff to coordinate with the chair and the vice chair to make versus the type of decision where a designated authority from each of the advisory committee would be preferred?
Well, the one that comes up for us all the time is simply setting the agenda. Now, we've made some progress on that if we can stick to it by each committee establishing the agenda for the following meeting at the end of the current meeting, or at least that's the procedure we followed in the Legal Advisory Committee. But in the absence of that, and there hasn't been a cohesive way to do agenda planning, at the staff level, we've been kind of stuck with generalities rather than specifics on behalf of the Commission in announcing to the public what to anticipate at each meeting. So that's a recurring one where if we could have simplified input to the Commission, we think you get a disproportionate benefit from doing that.
And let me just explain a little bit of the concern that was raised at the Legal Advisory Committee and why it's not just the chair, which might be what people may be wondering, why not have the chair and the vice chair work with the staff on these things. There was a sense that both Commissioner Filkins-Weber and I expressed that sometimes when you're the chair and you're working with staff, you really feel like you should be checking in with other members of the Commission so that it's not really the chair making decisions with the staff. And that one way to feel like you're getting, as chair, that you're getting, good information from your commissioners is to be talking to the leads of the committee that might be involved in whatever this is. It might be a technical issue. It might be a public information issue. And so it's to take it a little bit out of just the chair and the staff, which I think we both expressed can be a little, uncomfortable and not feeling like you're checking in with fellow commissioners on some of these decisions. Does that capture the conversation? And so that's why not just the chair.
I just say it's add from our meeting, and then having a particular person in each committee to look to, I think in turn facilitates the ease of being chair from meeting to meeting.
It's sort of a question to both the chair and also to our council. The chair today can talk to the lead or the lead person from each of the advisory committee at will. Is that not the understanding we have?
Yes.
So if the chair is at liberty to talk to each of the, whatever that individual is called, the chairperson from the advisory committee.
Is the problem.
Now, did I hear an understanding that the chair can talk to each of the lead from the advisory committee at will?
In concept, I think that there may be different practices from committee to committee as to whether there is, in fact, someone who fills that role.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that may be a separate issue, assuming, and I emphasize the word assuming, there's a lead person for each of the advisory committee, and again, I'm making a statement, I need your verification on this, and the chair can talk to each of these lead individual from each of the advisory committee, then the chair, by definition, has a reasonable input from each of the advisory committee, and the chair can work with staff in making these type of decisions. And I guess I need to be corrected where my assumption is inaccurate or incorrect.
I think sometimes the problem becomes if the three commissioners, the chair and whoever the chair wants to speak with, are engaged in a three-person conversation, then we have a problem.
Well, yeah, in our model that we've constructed here, you don't have three people from any one committee meeting, which constitutes a state body. So we've divided people up in such a manner that you don't run into the Bagley-Keene issue, because three is defined in a very particular way, and we would choose the people to avoid that definition. So you wouldn't have, well, I'll just stop with that. I think everything you've said is correct, that there is no correction as to what you're saying at all. I think there may be differing practices as to whether the people have been designated in each committee that match Commissioner Yao's hypothetical. And indeed, I think what the proposal is to make the practice what you're describing.
Correct. It's to designate a lead that meets all the things we've talked about in terms of, not just bipartisanship, but different parties, so that when people are consulting, it's okay. But we really need to formalize that, so when these things come up, the chair can say, I need to talk to you about this, and I need to talk to this other person about this, and then we can get back to the staff.
If the chair feels that she has that authority already, why is there a necessity to clarify it?
There's not always a lead in each committee to talk to. Yes.
Could I ask for, to me it seems like what's happening, and I haven't been a chair in the past, so maybe those who have been, there's quite a significant amount of information as you're serving as the chair that's on the large scale issue that the chair and vice chair are trying to coordinate, and sometimes the specific details that are related to an advisory committee. It seems like this is simplifying the process for staff to be able to have someone to go, a point person to have these discussions, because then otherwise it becomes telephone. Mm-hmm. Staff will tell the chair, and then chair tries to tell the advisory, and the advisory gives the chair some history, background. So it becomes adding a middleman or middle person. And I would imagine as a chair, your duties are pretty full already, that you don't need to be playing the middleman in the process. I think it's still necessary to have the chair and the vice chair to be included in the discussion, in the sense that they need to be aware of what's happening, but that there's a mechanism, that we formalize a mechanism to have the staff have ability to contact the advisory committees who probably have the bigger background and knowledge of the issue at hand.
So before we all speculate on what is the authority that Mr. Claypool needs. Why don't you tell us what it is that you envision would make this work better for the commission, and then we can go from there.
A single point of contact permanently established in each advisory committee would just give us the continuity we need to know that as we're developing things that are going to go on, or that we express certain problems that may go forward. And I'll give you a very good example. We have been promising the Finance and Advisory Committee certain spreadsheets since the beginning of our venture. If that passes on and on, it gets lost. And so that's what we're looking for, the single point of continuity, and then that person can make things, I would think, a lot easier for the rotating chair and vice chair.
And is your suggestion or what you need is to be able to go directly to the lead?
No, I would always go to the lead, the chair, and the vice chair. They will always be CC'd.
That's what I thought. Okay. Does that help at all, Commissioner Yao? No. Okay. Yeah. Commissioner Dye.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with designating someone from each advisory committee. I just don't understand why it has to be permanent. I think we have so many constraints on us already, and we're all volunteers. And the whole reason we went to a rotating leadership structure in the first place was to spread the burden of leadership. And I think that's equally true in the advisory committees. And I don't really understand why you need a permanent person. If we can tell you who your contact person should be until the next meeting, I think that should be sufficient.
So, now you understand it a little bit, perhaps the issue, Commissioner Yao, that it rotates in some places, so it's never clear exactly who the person is in the advisory committee, and we're just trying to move faster and more efficiently as we get into this next stage where we need to be able to do that. So the recommendation is for a permanent lead person, and that's what the discussion is on.
I'm curious as to, I know in our meeting we didn't have a discussion in terms of our preference for this or not for technical and outreach. Have the other advisory committees made their determination about this in a formal sense? Legal did. They're the only ones that have.
So Finance and Administration didn't meet, and in the Public Information Committee, we've always rotated.
And has legal made that a one-point contact or a rotating?
1 point.
Well, let me just speak to the rotation. It's been informal, and then, I'm the one that was never really mattered to me that we had a rotating chair or not. So, of the whole commission. But that was back when we were just getting started, and everybody, wanted a hand in and to be really a part of it. I'm on the side of, if this is just going to make things easier, it's going to eliminate multiple contacts, it's going to get things done. We're on a tight frame. I would favor it.
Commissioner Anchetta?
So the one question I think this is fine, but the one question I would have is if you're a committee member and you want to get something to somebody else, who do you go through? Do you go through the lead, or do you go to the chair? I know we're trying not to go to the staff, so I think we're clear about that.
What are you trying to do? Who are you trying to reach?
Well, let's just say I have a concern about something that's being discussed. It's been delegated. Who should I convey my concern to? The chair, the lead, to both?
The chair, that's why I said, what is it? Is it something that's related to one of the advisory committees?
Right, well, let's say it's a technical committee issue. I'm not the lead, and some commissioner is the lead, and there's a chair, different person, and we're trying to streamline things. Who should I go to?
In this world, if this were approved, I think the answer would be that there would be a lead technical advisory committee person, and that you would always CC the chair and the vice chair as well.
Okay. Right, and I might clarify, we're trying to establish this for staff. Now, what type of relationship this commission has amongst themselves is different. This is strictly for us to know who we're going to keep for continuity.
Right. And the other thing is that there are occasions, I think it's already happened, where the staff just contacts a commissioner directly for whatever expertise or something, and that's fine, too. We respond directly to the staff person.
Right, but now we would go through the lead.
Go through the lead, okay.
Right. That's
So, let's say, for example, Mr. Miller asked me, you had a few leads on racially polarized voting because you were contacting a few people a few weeks ago. You can't call me directly and say, can you give me those leads? I'm shooting these leads, sorry.
There are always going to be exceptions, but certainly Kirk should establish that with the lead, and then CC. It's just more than anything, it's knowing where things are going and knowing how things are flowing to us. That's all, and also, and most importantly, establishing a clear pattern for who's making the decisions for this commission, and that it's not the staff.
Commissioner Filkensweber.
And that's where it gets a little problematic, and where there's a difference between what Mr. Miller had said earlier, the difference between what you described as being mundane or not substantive decisions. And so, although, Mr. Claypool, I understand what you're saying, and you would like to see a point person for quote-unquote decisions, that's the problem. And so, for instance, the point that I made earlier about your scope of work on an in-process review, if we move forward on this idea, you want to move quickly, you want to move efficiently as staff, and you want a designated lead person, maybe the technical lead, to, call the shots and make the decisions on that. Problem is that this commission has already made it a policy and procedure that those types of quote-unquote decisions would not be made by a single individual. And that's why it's problematic. So I'm troubled here. We do need the communication designation for staff's purposes to ease staff. But we need to determine, and this is where it gets a little more complex, as to what the level of authority this commission would be granting to that lead person. And that's why we've always come back to this commission and said the full commission will give delegated authority on certain issues. But it does cause a problem because this commission has not released their ability to make decisions to these designated leads to help you in the manner in which you just described, which was that you would have a designated person for quote-unquote decision-making, but this commission hasn't done that yet.
Commissioner Dye?
Yeah, my recommendation is we continue with what we've been doing, which has worked very well, which is when we know a decision is coming up that will have to be made in between meetings, and if it involves, a particular advisory committee, that we designate that person until the next meeting, because we are going to be meeting a lot. So I don't really see why there would be any problem with, not having someone, not knowing who it is going to be for the next meeting, because we can always make that decision at the following meeting 3 days later. I really don't think we're going to lose a lot of time. I also, as part of this, I am assuming that we are giving flexibility to staff to my recommendation when we agendize all of these public input hearings is we allow the opportunity to potentially have business meetings, even if it's just for an hour, if we need to make decisions, because we're all going to be there anyway. So, that we have our standing agenda of items, as I said, that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, of a general agenda that would cover most items, that we keep that going so that if we have a sub-item that we need to meet on for 15 minutes as a full commission, and we're all going to be stuck there that day anyway, that we are able to make that decision as a full body. And if we need someone in the 3 days in between, that we designate whoever the committee, gets a volunteer, because it may be different each time. With the jam-packed schedule that we have, again, I know it might be more convenient for you to have a permanent person, but it's not more convenient for us. All of us are juggling other full-time jobs, and I think we're not going to be available certain times. We want to make sure it's covered. So, to me, I think what we've been doing is working just fine.
If I might, it's working possibly fine for the 14 of you, but it's not necessarily working fine for your staff. And so we periodically get requests from 6, 7, 8 commissioners about things, and my staff gets instructions from commissioners, and then they stop working because they honor a call from you because you're the commission. And so I roll in and I say, what's been done? I'm working on something new. And so it undermines what I'm trying to do. we had a policy where it rolled through the chair and the vice chair. It doesn't always work that way. All I'm looking for is one person that I can work with that you flow through and flows back up. Now, if you want to continue working this way, we can, but it isn't the most efficient way for us to work, and that's what I was looking for, was just an efficient way to know that if there was something from legal, and I wasn't looking to have this commission abrogate its authority to one person. The whole thought was that if there was, and I probably decision's the wrong term, but the whole thought was that I would come to you and say, we have these emails that have come in, very, very mundane. You know, can you and the chair and vice chair make a decision on it, you know, for the commission? Now, it can be you can send them through the commission, or you can wait and say we'll bring it up later, and then we can have that discussion, you know, amongst the full commission. But in the meantime, we have things that we're not going to post unless this commission makes a decision. So it can wait until we have our next business meeting, or it can be a decision that 3 people can make on behalf of the commission.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Then what we need to recognize and understand is that staff has asked for our cooperation and that we follow the procedure that they have recommended, which is if you have any questions, concerns, recommendations, that it goes to the chair and vice chair of every meeting. This was an email that I had sent out when I was chair, and there was a process and procedure. For instance, Commissioner Anchetta said I had, or actually I think it was, he had made recommendations to Commissioner Galamas-Malloy regarding some issues he wanted to see on the agenda, and Commissioner Galamas-Malloy could not get to them, so then she transferred it to me. And again, staff didn't have to worry about that because as a chair, we had to make the decision as to what we could fit on the agenda and pass it along. So what I would consider that we understand that the process and the flow of information would be to the chair and to the vice chair. The chair and vice chair will make the decision as to what flows to staff and in what, you know, what manner, I guess, you know, what prioritize, things of that nature. I think the chair, and if you need a decision, Mr. Claypool, I think that the chair and vice chair, I trust that they recognize, whomever they are, that this commission has a set policy that no decisions will be made that are obviously significant. So, you know, if it's a venue issue, please change the venue 3 blocks down. I don't think the commission is going to worry about it. But something that's more substantive, I think the chair and vice chair, whomever it is, will understand that they won't be making decisions at your request. And again, based on what Commissioner Dye said, we're going to have so many meetings close at hand. We will have a generalized agenda item on there to address some of these concerns. And maybe there will be a balance on what is emergency or not. But if we all understand that that's the proper flow of communication, will that help you? Or do you think that there are certain circumstances without delegated authority where you need a decision by the commission on this schedule that would have to be done that's not mundane and more substantive?
No, I don't, but I will say that it will put some pressure. For instance, the agenda is a good point. Right now, at the behest of the chair and the vice chair, we typically go out to someone. We're not always sure who that someone is or who speaks for them, but we'll go out to each one of the advisory committees to find out what needs to go on the agenda. We find ourselves scrambling a lot on that. You handle it very well, but it is, as the time periods compress, it's going to become more difficult for us to establish these agendas sufficiently so that it tells the public what we're going to do, and without moving out to more people than the chair or the vice chair, or they're going to have to do more work, one or the other.
Well, as I understood, the chair is the one that's working on the agenda, so if staff does not have a recommendation from the chair based on input from the advisory, then I'm afraid that the chair would be the one that would be failing in the you know, getting things appropriately agendized.
So it sounds to me like what we have is a breakdown in a system that we set up that should work. So I'm going to reiterate what we're supposed to be doing. Members of advisory committee ask, because we decided we need, the advisory committee agendas need to be specific so that the public knows what we're discussing. So those items are supposed to go to the chair of the commission so that the commission can then talk to the staff and say, can you agendize this for whatever, legal, financial, et cetera. So that's the way that's supposed to go. Staff's not supposed to be going directly to the advisory committee, and the advisory committee is not supposed to be going directly to staff. It's supposed to flow through the chair. And then as Commissioner Filkins-Weber noted, if there are things that have to be decided that are not of a substantive nature, again, it goes through the chair and the vice chair, and the chair and the vice chair should know now, by this time, it's kind of like, obscenity, you know it when you see it, that this is the issue that really is not a formalistic, mundane issue, that this is something that needs to go to the full commission. Now, if people want to designate leads for their committee because they think it makes life easier, they can do so, because that would actually make life easier for the chair. I can say that when the chair knows who to call, instead of, like this last week, there were so many people in technical that were going directly to the chair about items on the technical and outreach. It would have been great to have a key lead person from technical or a key lead person from outreach for the chair to go to, instead of dealing with a lot of members of those committees. But if the advisory committees don't feel compelled to do that, and to keep rotating or to keep it vague, we can't really do anything about that.
I'm speaking as just a member of the commission, not speaking for the technical advisory committee, but I think that there's really a need. There's kind of two issues. There's one that's the commissioners, as we said, the commissioners' understanding of their roles and responsibilities. But again, I think it goes back to, that's one aspect which you just addressed. But the other side is what makes things easier for staff and communicating with us too. And I think that there really does need to be, I feel like there does need to be a point person. If it doesn't want to be, legal decided not for it to be rotating, there's the other option of a halfway in between where you could maybe do someone for a month or 3 weeks, because I think if we're changing someone every week, it's going to be hard for us to remember. It's going to be hard for staff to remember. But I personally feel that having a lead designation, if we're, at least for the technical committee, having done a little bit of the work, I could see the level of coordination that has to be done between, just let's say, as an example, between now and the next meeting. Commissioner Ontai is the incoming chair and Commissioner Aguirre is the incoming vice chair. I don't know if they want to be the point person from staff to say, please contact someone from technical so we could have your direction. And then someone from technical has to contact the chair and then give it to staff. Isn't it easier to have a straight line with that? Is that what we're saying we can do with a CC of the chair and the vice chair?
If you don't mind, we still have, I hate to really cut this short. I think we've got one thing resolved, which is if we stuck to the procedures we had agreed upon, that would already go like 90% of the problems. I think the issue of the leads and maybe can wait. I think what would be good is at the end of this meeting, if everybody can tell the incoming chair and vice chair and the staff who's going to be the lead for the next meeting, that would help tremendously. And then we can later talk about what permanent temporary process we want for leads on our commission.
I agree that leads are okay. It's an option of the advisory committee.
I'm suggesting that we just do the leads for this next week, so that we know who our chair is, who our vice chair is, our lead of technical, our lead of finance, our lead of outreach, and everybody knows this from now until the next meeting.
Please, amen.
Okay?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Why don't we do it right now so that we don't have to come back to it?
All right. Because we have, if people can just volunteer, I'm going to ask for volunteers for each committee. Who wants to we've got a legal committee lead. Who wants to volunteer for finance and administration for the next week?
Just so we put the name down, I'm the lead on legal.
Finance and Administration, Columbus Malloy. Public Information Advisory Committee.
Mike.
Who? Michael. We did outreach.
Yeah.
I'll volunteer because they're going to be doing chair and vice.
That's right, they're going to need some help.
One caution in that regard, because all three of you are on the outreach committee, so that's the only, I already looked at this, because you probably wouldn't have a problem any other time, but that's why I asked you if the two of them are on outreach together.
We're actually developing a computer program that will provide a random. But that's another reason why a designated person can be helpful, is then you don't have to kind of work the puzzle each time.
We're going to keep going. We're just going to...
For now, Jean is fine.
All right. Technical lead.
I had done a lot, but I'm happy to give it to someone else if you'd like a chance. I don't mean to monopolize.
Since Vince is not here, it's a good time to assign it to him.
No, that doesn't work now. I say stay with it.
Okay, I'd be happy to do it. I just didn't want to monopolize if someone else would like to step in.
All right, is that all the...
Just one suggestion.
Yes.
We have a table under the We Draw the Line website, identify who the next chair and the vice chair is. Let's come up with a table for each of the subcommittee or the advisory committee, and from this point on, it'll just be very clear. And task each of the advisory committee to come up with that table and be ready to be put onto the website, otherwise by the next time we meet. This way, we'll put this issue to bed once and for all.
I don't think it's going to work, because what people are saying is they don't want to commit into the future, that they want to do it on an ad hoc basis. That's what I'm hearing. So I think we can keep what we've got, and we'll continue to function on an ad hoc basis. Okay.
And just, could you summarize for me the roles and responsibility of that lead?
To gather all requests and information from that committee for items to be placed on the advisory committee meeting, and relay those to the chair and vice chair. And that's it.
What is their ability to work with staff? I'm thinking with the technical in terms.
That's what we just said.
I just want to make sure I was clarified on.
Yep. Goes if somebody if you want to contact us, you go through the chair.
So if there's issues, to summarize, there were some things that we had heard in our outreach meeting that we decided that we want to make sure Q2 provides for us for the next meeting. I would give this to Commissioner Ontai, and he would pass that on to staff.
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Anchetta.
Could I just ask the staff in an email or something to just be sure that we're, because I'm not exactly sure exactly when we're not supposed to contact whom, that we just memorialize that somewhere.
Just remember, you have to contact your advisory committee lead.
That's it.
That's it.
Never contact the chair directly.
No.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Under what circumstances?
If it doesn't pertain to if you're not on the committee, and let's say you have some question about a technical and you don't know anything about it, I could see that I would want to go directly to the chair because I don't know anything.
And then I'll send it over to technical.
And one point of clarification, because I think that's what had happened before with this last one, but then, so we were in communication with the chair set the agenda, but there were some expanded items that the technical and outreach didn't realize was going to be on the agenda, so to make sure that the incoming chair relays the final agenda to those advisory committees so they know what is on what finalized on the agenda, so it's not a surprise.
And I think the reason that happened is because there were people that went directly to staff and put items on the advisory committee agenda. So if we follow this procedure, that shouldn't happen. Okay?
Yes. Should I have a motion on that?
I don't think we need a motion. We're just clarifying and reaffirming our existent system policy. Okay. All right. Do folks want to power through? I know some of us need to catch a plane. We have two more items. We have legal advisory committee report.
And logistics.
I'm sorry. Do we need to do the logistics before we adjourn? Yes?
I think so, unless everybody knows what to do.
Okay.
On next week, 2 weeks from now.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to hold that for a minute, if that's okay. And I want to make sure, because then I'll have to decide whether to fly out or not, or cancel my flight. Can we have a report, not so much from the Legal Advisory Committee, but a report from our Chief Counsel, who wants to update us on the work with our firm, with Gibson Dunn, who's been doing a great job negotiating fees, conditions. That's what he's been great at doing, exactly what Chief Counsel should do, which is managing outside counsel. And I just want to make sure we get that discussion because it does involve also costs and issues that we may need to know, and also may inform the facility, the logistics. I'm not sure. Mr. Miller.
Sure. Well, after a long selection process that you're all familiar with, we're down now to actually having to do the work, which is actually a pretty exciting prospect. I think I can simplify the approach down to 4 buckets or bushels that we were talking about in our committee. When thinking about the work that the voting rights attorneys will perform, item 1 will be additional training following on what you've had and keyed to topics of particular interest. We're trying to do that at our next meeting and anticipate blocking out about 3 hours if we can afford to do that specifically for that work. Next is working with Q2, and this is really where by far the largest number of hours and the greatest effort will be expended. And that's 2 parts. The short part is getting the 2 together to exchange information, to understand how Q2 operates, to get a download on existing data that they have already about map drawing. But the bigger part of that is establishing the platform for an ongoing relationship through the redistricting process. And the opportunity to save money here for us is to take full advantage of the services that Q2 is contracted for and to leverage that into reducing legal fees. Now, that doesn't mean less legal advice. What I'm talking about here is using the factual development portion of the Q2 services so that the lawyers don't have to do that. In a typical case, you only have half the equation. You have the lawyers doing everything. You don't have the Q2 piece. So if this was a piece of commercial litigation, it would be up to the lawyers to go out and gather the facts in the form of taking depositions, reviewing documents, etc. You go out, you bring all that home, and then you start the legal analysis. Here, Q2 is really the front person for that responsibility. They're out there in the field bringing in the facts that support the maps that require the legal advice. So to the extent that we can save lawyer time from being on the outside, if you will, that's a significant opportunity. So our immediate task is to understand how Q2 will organize the information it's receiving in the field, hopefully summarizing that in a very neat package that will permit the lawyers to go right to legal advice. And if that works well, and I think it will, that'll be very helpful to all of us. Now, that results in 2 things. The big product, if you will, at the end of the day from the lawyers is the final report. And that is the report that's required by our statute, and it's the report that will be the support for your decisions in any litigation that should follow adoption of the maps. So obviously, that's a very key thing. I guess it's fair to say lawyers are doing two things. They're advising you along the way, and they're creating this final report that's going to support the decisions you make about the maps. So our concept is, rather than waiting until the night before the term paper is due to start writing the final report, that we bake that in along the way using the facts that Q2's developing, so that we've got a product that we can explain to you, and it's ready when the maps are ready. And we think that package and that approach will yield a very good result and the most cost-effective result we can. To this end, there's a joint meeting with Q2 next week. I was actually hoping we could do it earlier, but it's scheduled for next Thursday, and that's fine. That's still very timely. That'll be the first of, I think, will be a number of ongoing meetings between the two. There's another issue I want to alert you to in this regard. As part of there's a contracting process now, which I hope is not a real big deal. It's actually simpler on the legal side than in others, but in the state way of doing things, we end up with a formal contract between the law firm and the state. And as part of that, I am asking Gibson Dunn to make some additional disclosures that we have found necessary. Information showed up on the internet that the firm has done some lobbying and made some contributions. So when I saw this just last night, and when I did, I contacted George Brown and also followed up with Dan Kolke today about this. And what I learned is, well, a couple of things, several things. They were actually surprised by it, and the reason is the firm's lobbying work is what I'd call very tangential to what they're typically doing, and they themselves were not familiar with it. Please accept this as an interim report. I'm not done with this. That's why I'm asking for additional disclosures from the firm. But here's what we've got. It appears that all or virtually all of the lobbying is in Washington and not in California. They immediately started an email chain. They don't have the Bagley-Keene rules throughout the firm to try to identify, well, who are these lobbyists? And as to California, thus far only one popped up. It was in the early 2000s, and it dealt with some work for the soft drink industry. So that would not implicate us. There is current lobbying work going on in Washington. It appears that those are all commercial clients as opposed to political entities. I think it's fair to say that that is the extent, but as I noted, we're asking for a formal report on that, and what I'm offering you today is my telephone summary. When they met with us, they were reading the disclosure statute, the one that you're familiar with, that you were governed by when you joined the Commission, rather more narrowly than we do. They understood its application to be the individuals who are doing the work, and with those four that you met. And with respect to those, none of them have had any lobbying activity, nor have they made political contributions that reach our threshold, which is $2,000 to any individual candidate. However, the firm, independent of those through a PAC, has made contributions. It appears that they've been very egalitarian in their distribution of monies, it's within a couple of $1,000s as between Republicans and Democrats. It would have been better if we had had that information disclosed when we were doing the contracting process, but I'm bringing it to you now, and that's how it falls out. And I believe those were all federal races as opposed to state legislative races. And that's pretty much the report on that issue.
Discussion?
Were any of the, to this level of detail, were any of those California congressional races?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, that's all.
Could you give me some context, because I'm not familiar with a legal firm like this? How was it that they didn't know? Is it because the institution is so large, or is it just they didn't do due diligence in researching it, or was it an understanding of their interpretation, as you said, of the conflicts of interest?
Yes. And that's actually not a flippant answer. You've hit all three buckets correctly on this. They have, I think, about 900 lawyers, and the problem of conflicts, this is not a conflict per se that I'm thinking of, but conflicts among clients are commonplace in firms of that size, and it's an ongoing problem for them. So managing that is an issue when you have 900 lawyers. The other one is as to the lawyers we're working with. This work is really tangential and foreign to what they're doing in their everyday practices. They're principally commercial and, as we know, have done a fair amount of voting rights work, but are not involved on government issues where you might be representing a client as a lobbyist. So I guess it's fair to say it really doesn't touch their practice or their lives, and they didn't focus on it for that reason.
Commissioner Araya.
The information with respect to contributions to federal races, including California congressional, that's the only thing we're talking about is contributions, not any kind of representational issues. With respect to California electeds or campaigns or anything like that, they have not actually represented anyone, they've just contributed?
That is fair to say, yes.
Any more comments? Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
This firm has not provided this commission full disclosure because the information that you're providing right now is based on what you've seen on the Internet and based on the limited information that you've received in a telephone conference with Mr. Kolke today. Is that correct?
And Mr. Brown.
And Mr. Brown. So what I find odd is that there isn't any further discussion from any of these commission members that sit before me that you had such concerns regarding the Leone firm, regarding their lobbying efforts, and yet I don't hear any discussion regarding this firm's lobbying efforts, especially under a circumstance where we don't have full disclosure. There was also discussion by this commission regarding the lack of disclosure from the Rose Institute. So I'd certainly like to hear from anybody else that might have concerns about this firm's failure to read a government code section 8252 as a firm. Because the other problem that I have, Mr. Miller, firms of this size, actually firms of any size, given that I was a partner in a firm, and this firm most certainly should probably have a conflicts, computer program. Find it a little odd that they hadn't run anything through their conflicts program because it might have. Now, conflicts in the sense of what we're talking about are two different things. But be that as it may, there are conflicts that come up in the representational capacity, which I would think all of their lobbying people would be in there. which sounds like to me that most of their congressional PAC money individuals would be in there, unless they see that to be something different. But I'm concerned on the lack of disclosure. I'm concerned about their failure to read 8252. I mean, I can see that they did interpret it a little differently, that they did likely respond as to those 4, but I'd like to hear a little bit more discussion as to the silence that I observed by my fellow commission members in comparison to your discussion as to the Rose Institute or Margaret Leone, for that matter.
Well, I'm not going to ask them to comment on that, but I think there are a lot of hands up, and I know I have a comment as well. So I have Columbus Malloy, who wants to comment on the report. Commissioner Dye. Raya, was your hand up? Commissioner Raya. Over here? No? Commissioner Anchetta?
So first a clarification.
And I'll put myself in the queue.
Okay. So was this discussed at the Legal Advisory Committee, or is this the first time that all of us as commissioners are hearing this information?
The latter.
The latter.
I learned of this last night and followed up in the evening and early morning.
Okay. Commissioner Falkensweber, I can only speak for myself, but please don't take my silence as anything other than shock, absorbing the information and processing what options lay before us as a commissioner. I am as concerned as I was at the time we were hiring our legal and our technical consultants regarding transparency and disclosure and process, and clearly this is a situation that I'm very frustrated at this point in the process that we're dealing with this. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Can you confirm for me when we will actually have the list of information, the full disclosures, including the contributions, including the representation, all of it? When will we have it?
I believe we have their full attention on this issue, and are, they were putting real effort into it today. With that in mind, I would expect that process to be complete early next week.
The reason that I ask, given that we just granted or approved such a large contract with this firm, and that we have had a very public process around our hires to date, it concerns me that you had to find out about this on the internet, and you had to go to the firm and bring it to their attention, because I think we've been clear with all of the consultants under whom we have been considering that it was not just about the people we saw in front of us to do the work. It was about their boards. It was about their donors. It was about the whole package. And my gut is that we need to have an emergency meeting to review the information as soon as we have it. I would be interested to entertain other suggestions, but to me, pending review of that information, I think their contract is actually in jeopardy, potentially. I mean, maybe it's not, but again, it's a similar situation to before when we were considering the contracts. If we don't have the information, we're not going to go on blind faith here.
I have Commissioner Dye, Raya, and Chetan, and myself in the queue, and Commissioner Parvenu.
Yes, I'm actually troubled that I had heard a wind of this, and I actually thought the Legal Advisory Committee had had an opportunity to discuss it, but it sounds like they have not. It sounds like the preliminary information alleviates a major concern, which is it sounds like the lobbying work is not with the California legislature, which I would have a major issue with. But it does sound, the California congressional races, I think, is a concern. I'm not particularly worried about the soft drink industry. So, I mean, I think we need more information is what it comes down to evaluate this. It's an attention to detail thing again. This is also the firm that didn't get the number of congressional districts right. So,
Commissioner Raya, Commissioner Anchetta.
Yeah, I'm troubled by this, but I think for the same, I agree with Commissioner Dye's approach in terms of some of these things, if they bear out as has been preliminarily described, I don't think they're that so serious. For example, the Washington law, I think it's sufficiently distant. But I'm troubled by the fact that, and I'm assuming it wasn't a willful non-disclosure, but I don't know at this point if it was willful or not. So I'd like to confirm that it was not willful. It sounds like it's not, but I want to confirm that. But I do want to wait until we get more information because I want to confirm. I'm troubled by the donations element, and I want to see if there's anything that's tied in. If there's any if it's just those ones that you mentioned, I'm not feeling that troubled about the lobbying activity. But the fact that it hasn't been disclosed, and there may be other things that were, and again, this is simply an internet search that you're doing as part of your, and I appreciate your having done this, of course, certainly. That's troubling. So, but I want to get a fuller picture before making any kind of decision. But at this level, it's quite disturbing that this is coming out.
I've got myself in the queue, and then I have Commissioner Parvenu and Commissioner DiGiulio. Is that correct? I spoke, we didn't talk about this legal advisory. Our chief counsel mentioned it to me before the meeting, which is why I was trying to get to this. If we were to get to the part of the discussion about whether the disclosures are such that we wouldn't feel comfortable retaining the firm, I want to put that to the side right now. I am very troubled by it doesn't matter to me that it's not intentional. I'm very troubled by the fact that we had to discover this ourselves, and that a firm like that would not look at that. If you're following this commission at all, which you would hope that the firm that's about to represent us doing voting rights work would be following the commission, you would be reading the papers and hearing all the controversy about all the partisan sniping, and that we've done this, and that we've favored so-and-so, and that somebody didn't disclose, and therefore, this has been, I know we're in it more than other people, but I do think it's been fairly public. And so the fact that they didn't see this, that they didn't, in light of that, interpret that section of the regs in the broader way, and not just to the 4 people that appeared before us. I don't know what that speaks to, but it bothers me. I don't think it's intentional. I do think that these firms are huge. Having worked with them for many years, and I know they have a governance section of the firm. They always do, and they do the DC office, and they do all the regulatory work, FCC, SEC, USDA. All their commercial clients. They basically have a lot of corporate clients who, part of what they do for them is not just transactional business law, but they work for them in DC. So I know all that, and I know that they may not have thought of that as being the equivalent of a lobbying firm that lobbies a legislature on California issues, but still, the reg was there. And I don't know that I have at this point a concrete suggestion, but I don't think it's enough to go to the second part yet of the discussion, which is, well, let's look at whether there is a conflict and whether these are, I guess I'm still a little stuck on the fact that they didn't look at that statute more carefully, and that we had to go to them instead of them saying, oh, we've been reading all this stuff in the paper. They could have just said that. We've been reading all this stuff in the paper, and we realized, we didn't disclose this, but we do political work, and we do have people in our firm who contribute to races or to PACs or something. It bothers me that they didn't see themselves as having to do that with us. I don't know that it's a concern to detail that translates into legal work, or whether it does say something about their judgment legally. I'm not sure. That's all I At this point, I don't have a recommendation. I'm just venting. Commissioner Parvenu.
I'll be brief because my sentiments have been expressed by everyone here before me, so there's not much more I can add other than to say that I too am troubled by this revelation. I'm not certain how it can be corrected at this point. I'm looking at if we were to go as drastic or extreme as retracting the contract, but where that would put us as a commission at this late date, and we need someone on board as soon as possible. I don't know either what the fix is here, but I want, for the record, it to be known. If you recall, I was inclined to abstain from my vote. Now, I wish I had, but for other reasons. But now that we are here, hopefully we can fix this in a agreeable way.
Commissioner